To finish up this module on energy balance, I want to look at one of the components of energy expenditure, something called the thermic effect of food, which is basically how much energy we burn each day in the processing of the foods that we consume. Okay, so the thermic effect of food is also sometimes called specific dynamic action or DIT, diet-induced thermogenesis. And basically what it relates to is we notice in the lab, and I'll actually show you in the next slide, that following meals, so each of these areas represent a meal. This dotted line here represents basal metabolic rate, and this is a study with, I think it was 17 people. Yeah, 37 people, 17 females and 20 males. And this is kind of summary data from that study where they found that every time that a meal was consumed, these arrows, above their basal metabolism, their basal metabolic rate, there was an increase in energy expenditure, right? Another meal, increase in energy expenditure. Another meal, increase in energy expenditure. So the thermic effect of food is that increase in energy expenditure following a meal. Okay, so what is this energy requirement? Well, if you remember back to your first year nutrition, an example of what we use energy for, to just bring glucose or bring amino acids into the bloodstream, like to have them pass through the intestinal cells and get into your bloodstream, you need to use active transport. And if you remember, active transport requires energy. So that's just one way that we use energy in the processing of our foods. Okay, and so this processing has to do with digestion, it has to do with absorption, it also has to do with getting those nutrients into the cells as well. Okay, although the full aspects of the thermic effect of food, they're not fully quantified either. Okay, so the thermic effect of food, diet-induced thermogenesis, specific dynamic action, they account for about 10% of daily energy expenditure. Okay, and the main thing that determines the thermic effect of food is how much food energy you consume. Okay, and how much protein is in that food. Protein in general has a higher thermic effect than the other nutrients. Okay. That said, what this doesn't mean is that if you want to burn more calories, you should eat more. Well, okay, it kind of means that, because that is true, that if you want to burn more thermic effect of food calories, you should eat more. However, you're also eating more. So you're also taking in more energy. So thermic effect of food does not compensate for the excess in energy that a person takes in, but it is one of the aspects of energy expenditure. And so this slide is from a review of different papers. So each of these are from different studies with different subject numbers, where they had different dietary macronutrient distributions, right? Where they had different proportions of carbs, proteins, fats, and alcohol as far as calorie content goes. And they noticed differences in the thermic effect of food, right? In diet-induced thermogenesis, same thing, okay? And what I really want to draw your attention to is that there is lots of variation in how much different diets promote a different, basically, energy expenditure for these types of diets. But in general, it's about less than 10%. And if I look at this one that's particularly high, I am not surprised to see higher amounts of protein, a higher proportion of protein. Because one of the main things we know about the thermic effect of food is that the thermic effect of protein is higher than carbohydrates and have a much higher thermic effect than lipids. Okay, so one of the things we often recommend for obesity and for weight management in general is a high protein diet. And there's several reasons for this. One reason is that protein has a higher thermic effect. Another is that, as we saw in the energy intake module, it might offer a slight benefit as far as preservation of lean body mass and burning of more body fat mass. And then also protein tends to be more satiating, something we'll talk about later. We tend to be more filled up because of the protein we consume. So it does actually stand to reason that a higher protein diet might be more beneficial for weight management. And this is one of those reasons why. Okay. Another study found that medium chain triglycerides, so what we find in like coconut oil, for instance, all our tropical oils, might have a higher thermic effect than kind of the main lipids we consume in our diet, these longer chain triglycerides. Fiber-rich foods might have a higher thermic effect. Whole foods might have a higher thermic effect. And actually eating one large meal seemed to have a slightly higher thermic effect as well. And while you might kind of run out to maybe change your diet after reading this, please keep in mind that the mechanisms of all of this and this area of research is still not black and white. Okay, a lot of the studies that have looked at thermic effect of food, they're smaller sample size, they don't have as much power. You could argue about how we measure thermic effect of food and if it's accurate. That's what some people argue about as well. So what I really want you to take from this is one of the things that contributes to energy expenditure is the thermic effect of food. One of the best ways to increase the thermic effect of food and kind of burn more calories from just processing the foods we eat is to consume meals that are higher in protein. Okay, and as always, I'm always going to recommend whole food based meals. Okay, there is some evidence also that getting enough physical activity might help improve the thermic effect of food. That's a bit debatable, but I'm never not going to recommend being more active as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our module on energy balance. And hopefully you kind of understand how we take energy in and how we expend it and how variable these things are between people, right? And some of the factors that contribute to energy intake and energy expenditure. Okay, so we'll expand on some of these concepts in future modules, but hopefully you have a good understanding because like everything builds off of these kind of basics of energy balance. Okay, that said, it's important to state that weight regulation, fat mass regulation is quite complex. So even though we know that energy intake compared to energy expenditure determines how much fat mass we store on the body, that doesn't answer the why. That doesn't answer the why do people eat the way they do? Why do people move the way they do? Why do people think the way they do? Right? It does not answer the question of complex human behavior, right? And that is something that we always have to keep in mind when working with individuals, any kind of individuals, but especially with individuals with obesity. Okay, so something to keep in mind, and I will see you in the next module. Take it easy.